Hello, class. This lesson is on angles, and we will cover just some basic terminology and degree measure, standard position of an angle, and coterminal angles. So to review some basic terminology here, a line, it's two distinct points, A and B, that determine a line AB that extends indefinitely in both directions. You can have a piece of a line with endpoints AB that would be a segment. We could also denote the line, let me come back up here, the line as line AB. The segment can be denoted as segment AB, and we can also construct a ray which goes, sorry, wrong thing, which goes in one direction, and we can notate it as ray AB. So an array, the portion of a line starts at A and continues through B indefinitely. An angle consists of two rays in a plane that has a common endpoint. So that common endpoint is this vertex here. And here we have a ray that extends out and another ray to form this angle in between. So those rays that I've copied here are considered the sides of an angle. And that common endpoint is your vertex. The starting side or starting position of an angle will be what's known as the initial side. So the initial side is where that angle is going to start rotating, and where it ends is known as its terminal side, okay, which is this side here. It's the location after a rotation. We can have two rotations. We can have a counterclockwise rotation, which goes counterclockwise. Counterclockwise will be positive angles, and clockwise rotation will be negative angles. So it's important to note here that the initial side is this ray that I'm copying, and it's rotating around counterclockwise to the terminal side. Think of terminal as terminates. And this particular ray is the initial side, CA, and the terminal side is CB. And a rotation can consist of more than one complete rotation. So this actual angle, instead of stopping here, or let me do this one, instead of stopping at CB, could actually keep rotating around, multiple times. Types of angles. Remember, an acute angle is an angle that measures between 0 and 90, which is indicated down here in this first slide. A right angle is an angle that measures 90. Here is your example there. An obtuse is an angle that measures between 90 and 180. There's an example of an obtuse. And a straight angle is an angle whose measure is 180, and it is a straight line. That straight line measures 180 degrees. Now we can have more than one angle, or excuse me, two angles put together that's going to give us either a measure of 90 degrees or 180. So when we talk about complementary, we are just talking about two angles, two positive angles whose sum is 90. Now the biggest, students will always say when you hear complementary, they'll say, oh, that equals 90. Well, no, equals 90 is a right angle. Complementary means two angles whose sum will be 90. Supplementary angles are angles whose sum is 180. So it's two angles whose sum is 180. Now, how can you keep from confusing the two? Just think of C comes before S, so C is going to pair with 90 because 90 is smaller than 180, or it would come before 180, and your S and 180 would go together. So our first example here is to find the complement and the supplement. So my angle is 40. I'm going to subtract 40 from 90 to find the complement. The complement is 50. And the supplement, I'm going to subtract from 180, the 40 from 180. So the supplement of 40 is 140 degrees. These next examples, we have to set up an equation to find the value of x and then substitute that value to find the angle measure. We're going to use complementary and supplementary to do this, that definition. This is a right angle. So I know that 6x and 3x, the sum of those two angles will equal 90. So I am going to add those two angles together and I'm going to equal them to 90 degrees and I'm going to solve the resulting equation. So here we end up x is equal to 10. Now keep in mind, x is not the answer that we need. X is the unknown, and we're going to substitute 10 into x to get the two angles. So I could either, substitute again here and get 30, or I could have just said, what is 90 minus 60, and I could have gotten 30 degrees that way. Notice here that we have a straight line, so that means the measure of that line is 180. So those two angles, the sum of the two angles is 180. I'm going to go ahead and add 4x and 6x to get 10x. I'm going to set it equal to 180, and I'm going to divide by 10 to get 18. Now you'll need to substitute 18 into each angle. So 4 times 18 will give us a measure of 72 degrees, and you can either substitute again or subtract 72 from 180. Either way, you should get 108 as the second angle. Here we're performing calculations. Now you can enter all of this into your calculator, which I would suggest using, but I am going to work these out by hand. So if I'm going to add these degrees and minutes. So this is 51 degrees, 29 minutes. The one little apostrophe means minutes. If there were two apostrophes, it would be seconds. And I want to add that to 32 degrees, 46 minutes. So when we add, we're going to add the units together. So I'm going to get 75 minutes and 83 degrees. Here, you're going to remember that there are 60 minutes in 1 degree. So notice that my minutes here, I have more than 60. So what I'm going to do is take 60 away, and I'm going to add a degree. So that's going to give us an angle that's 84 degrees, 15 minutes. Here we can subtract. Now the issue with this problem is that when I'm subtracting, I don't have any minutes here. So I need some minutes in order to subtract the 12. So what we're going to do is use the same that we know that we have 60 minutes in a degree. So we're going to borrow from a degree and get us some minutes. So we're going to reduce the 90 to 89 so that we can get 60 minutes. And then we can subtract these two angles now. When we subtract, we get 48 minutes, 16 degrees. And check your minutes. We have less than 60, so we're good to go. Now, to convert, you can do these in your calculator too. But by hand, what we have to do, I would say just use calculator on this one. All right, the button that you're going to use on your calculator, it's the button, it's the third column, and it looks like this. It's got a degree, a minute, and a second. And that you can convert between degrees, minutes, seconds. And there's also a button, if you arrow over, when you click it, that says DMS. And what that'll do is convert into degrees, minutes, and seconds. So angles in standard position. This is an important term to think about. When we talk about angles in standard position, we're talking about angles on a coordinate plane that have their vertex at the origin, their initial side is the positive x-axis. All right, so trying to highlight this, but it's not letting me do that. Oh well, let's go back over here. It's the positive x-axis, so that's the initial side, and your terminal side is where it ends up, so where it terminates. And we're talking about an angle here that is going counterclockwise. So notice that this angle ends in quadrant 1, and that this angle ends in quadrant 2. So think about the angle measures. So quadrant 1 would be acute angles. All right, quadrant 2 would be obtuse angles. Now, quadrant 3 and 4 do not have a special name for the angle. You just need to remember, notice that each quadrant differs by 90 degrees. So these angles in the third quadrant will fall between 180 and 270. And then the fourth quadrant falls between 270 and 360. Let's say you have an angle that falls on the X or the Y axis. So if I draw an X and Y axis, so we're talking about angles that would, have a terminal side, or excuse me, an initial side here and a terminal side here. Well, this would be a 90-degree angle. Let's say then that I had an angle whose initial side is the positive x-axis and it stops here on the negative x-axis. Well, that gives me a straight angle. So these angles that fall on the x or y axis are known as quadrantal angles. That means their terminal side will lie on the x or y axis. So you get measures like 90, 180, 270, and so on. We can also have angles that have more than one rotation. And if you have an angle with more than one rotation, you can have multiple angles that have the same terminal side. All right, so they have the same initial side and terminal side, but the difference is that their measures differ by 360. So look at this first example. Here I have an angle of 60 degrees. All right, so I've gone one rotation, but what happens if we rotate around and we come around to the same terminal side? Well, that gives us an angle with a measure of 420. So we can have more than one angle that shares the same terminal side. It's just that they differ by 360 degrees. Here, 110 is coterminal to 830. So when you're thinking of coterminal, think about that word. Coterminal are angles that have the same terminal side. Okay, so they differ by 360. To find these angles, we will add or subtract multiples of 360. So when I have a positive angle, I'm going to subtract. And if I have a negative angle, we will add. So what I'm going to do, I can either say minus 360 and find my total, or keep doing and then do minus 360, or I can do multiples of 360, which I am going to do multiples. I'm going to subtract by 720, which is 2 rotations of 360. When I subtract, I get 188 degrees. They want us to find the least positive measure. So that means if I were to subtract 360 again, I would end up with a negative angle. They want us to have a positive measure, okay, that is coterminal. So when I see coterminal, remember, differs by 360. So the next example, my angle is negative. So I am going to add multiples of 360. So I'm going to start with 360. I'm going to add and get 285. So my angle here is the least positive measure that's coterminal to negative 75. The next example, is also negative, so it's negative 800. I'm going to do multiples of 360, so I'm actually going to add 1080 because that is 363 times around. So I'm going to add 1080, and that's going to give me a coterminal angle of least positive measure of 280 degrees. Well, this finishes our lesson on angles, basic terminology, reviewing of geometry information. I hope this was helpful, so please let me know if you have questions.